I hate having a beard. I told myself I wasn't allowed to shave until I make another video. As you've seen, I've finally made another video, so I'm allowed to shave. Oh, much better. I can finally think clearly. Since getting the new Luminaris, Prism has gotten significantly better. The old weapon introduced a lot of problems with the deck, such as resource inefficiency and deck building issues. If you want to hear more on the specifics of that and more of a deep dive on the problems that she had, you can check out the video up here. But the deck is just much better, much smoother now. It's a much better experience. Let's just jump into kind of the core of what the deck looks like, and I can explain the thought process behind things afterwards. So, of course, we got the Luminaris, but we are still playing a switchboard of Iris and Luminaris. So we have a Herald game plan and an Aura game plan. We've got a package of these big, beefy red Heralds so we can smack our opponent in the mouth and get our hit trigger. The red ones are really important because they push that breakpoint of 7, letting us not let them just put a free 2-card block in front of that, and then we can get our Figment into play. Now, we do not have the other chess piece to free flip it. We're going to get back to that in a minute, though. And then we have a healthy blue and yellow count in the deck, and a good amount of auras in the deck for that switchboard game plan. The auras nicely double as resource cards for us on both game plans, so it consolidates a lot of deck slots. And then we have I would consider a reasonable amount of Figments in the deck. I think the like 5 to 6 kind of range is where you want to be at with a list like this. I found when I was playing like 4, I would get into spots where I just needed like one more Figment to kind of have that extra value to close the game. I was just like, I just wish I had like one more in the deck. It's pretty straightforward. We got Heralds, we got Figments, and we got Auras. Now let's jump into why we're playing certain things that we're playing. So we want a healthy blue and yellow count. Ideally, you want kind of close to like the 30 range of yellows for your Luminaris. Otherwise, you end up kind of drawing bricky hands that don't let you get that go again when you're on a big grip. And similarly, you want about that much on blues for when you're doing the Aura game plan. That does start to introduce a bit of a problem into the deck, where we want a lot of resource cards of a different color for our 2 different game plans. A bit of that can be resolved by relegating some of it to our sideboard and then moving back and forth between them, like shoving some of these blue auras in our sideboard, because we don't really necessarily need all of these when we're on the Herald game plan. But the raw efficiency of the new Luminaris, I think, is definitely worth you kind of having that like deck building drawback. What before would cost you like inf blues to have a functioning round, you can now just do off of a single yellow. So you can throw like a Herald, pitching a yellow, and your turn works much better. But also, one of the awkward things before was a lot of your good cards were at yellow, like Erudition, and they didn't really fit your cost curve when you're trying to pitch them. So you'd end up with these like yellows. Like one of the big ones was Figments. When you would draw a Figment before and you can't play it, like you're not trying to play a Figment from hand. That's just awful. So you have to pitch it. But then a lot of your turns, you need to be pitching blues to cover your turn. So you just be stuck with this Figment in your hand. And you're like, how do I get rid of this? I can't block with it. I have to pitch it. So you're now jumping through hoops trying to pitch this card. No longer a problem because our rounds are covered by yellows. And Erudition is one of the best cards in the deck. Honestly, both Eruditions are just incredible cards. And they just like didn't function in the deck before because you're not trying to throw in Erudition and then spend a full card on go again on it just for the hopes of drawing 2 cards. Same with the other Figment. Like you're not trying to spend 6 resources flipping this, attacking with it, and getting go again to draw 2 cards. It just like wasn't good enough. Now you don't have to jump through those hoops anymore. You just gotta get that go again for free. So much better. So your power cards are actually power cards in the deck now. So it's almost like we gained a full 4 power cards to the deck. And of course, they're not awkward to pitch, as I already said, which is a massive thing for the deck. Because one of the things too that you'll end up doing a lot with cards like Erudition is your first time seeing it, or first couple times seeing it, you just end up pitching it because you're like, there's no sense in throwing this right now. My opponent has all this armor. This will be better later on, so I want to pitch it and see it when my opponent's burned through their armor, where I can kind of guarantee getting through with this. Now, you can play things like Angelic Wrath to kind of force the issue your first time seeing it, but then it requires you playing cards like Angelic Wrath. and then you'd have to see them together. Now, I think a bit more interestingly is going to be the aura side of the deck building wise, because there's some interesting card choices here. So we've got Mage Master Boots and Tunic for our aura game plan. I imagine a lot of people would be surprised seeing specifically Tunic in this deck versus Imperium Rapture, I think is the name of the card. The free flip on that seems ridiculously good. One of the things that I've found as I've played Prism is I don't actually always want to flip my Figments when I get them into play, or necessarily when I hit with a Herald. And what I found has been good is kind of just sandbagging on the Figment and just like leaving it in play until you have some more soul, and then using your Tunic to pitch a blue and flip and swing with it, getting a lot of value off of a single pitch card, and just like I'll block with my hand and then push with this, or combine it with other things going on so I can kind of go wide on that. The turn I actually want to go wide with my Figment, not just feel like I'm forced to do it the first time I get that Figment into play, because it also gives you more flexibility later on in the game, where you get it into play and you're not like priced into blocking around it awkwardly, just kind of sacking it to the first thing your opponent throws at you. The Figments I find get better as the game goes later. As we get deeper into our deck cycles, the damage on the opponent's side is going to start going down and down as they're drawing more resource cards and less reds, meaning it's going to be harder for them to punch through to pop our Figment. So they kind of have to make a choice. Do they want to just directly attack the Figment and not really present anything at us? And we're just like, okay, I'll just throw 2 Heralds at you. Or do they want to gamble and throw something at us, and it's kind of a wimpy attack, and we just go, all right, I'll block. I still have my Figment in play, I'll get my free value. Basically, they get better as the game goes on because it gets harder to get them off the board. So the extra flexibility of the Tunic is really nice for that. And as our games tend to go long with this style of deck, you do get a lot of value out of the Tunic. I think it's very reasonable to play the other chess piece if you really wanted to. The way I'm trying to play it, though, the Tunic is really helpful. And the Tunic is really good on the Aura game plan, so we're getting to kind of double down with that card. Getting back to Auras, the Tunic is really useful for a number of things when we're Auras. Number 1, Mage Master Boots. Getting to go Tunic Mage Master is really important. We're not spending a full card on the usage of this ability anymore. The point of the Mage Master Boots is so that we can have a double aura turn using one of our blue auras as one of the double auras. So we can go, for instance, block with 2 cards, crack our Mage Masters, put 2 blue auras into play because the first one's going to get go again off of our Mage Master Boots. Getting that initial double aura into play is very crucial when you're playing auras. If you're just like playing one at a time, it's really easy for your opponent to pick them off and you to like never really get the ball rolling. That initial burst of auras is really important. What it also lets us do is pitch a single blue to play one of our 4-cost auras, or to play one of our Figments. Now you'll notice I'm fairly low on auras compared to what I imagine a lot of people are playing. Most people are probably on like 6+ yellow auras, where I'm only on the 4. I think it's very reasonable to add more if you really wanted to. I opted for a few less, and then what I'm trying to do instead is lean into my Figments a bit as the game goes later, and they kind of cosplay as auras. I'm trying to get like maybe 1 or 2 of these Figments into play over the course of the game. You're naturally going to end up getting some soul over the course of the game, even if you're not like throwing heralds at your opponent when you're playing auras. If we play all of our Genesises on our opponent's turn and get the trigger 1 time each, assuming our opponent kills it right away, we'll get 3 soul from that. We'll get 3 soul from our 3 soul shields, and then we have 1 more soul from our Halo. And the Halo will give us a Figment into play. So we already get that 1 Figment into play, which is crucial. Importantly, the Genesis will not let us get Figments into play. The wording on Prism is it is an action phase of trigger. So since Genesis is the beginning of our turn, it will not trigger Prism letting us get a Figment into play. But it still fuels our soul, so that way when we do get our Figments into play, we have the soul to utilize them. Ideally, we're trying to get probably like 2 to 4 Figments into play in the Aura matchups. And I want to trigger at least 2 of them. I want to trigger Protection, and I want to trigger Ravages. It's really important to get that extra value out of them, getting those extra Spectral Shields into play. One of the reasons I'm not like super deep on the auras is I found that in the Aura matchups, you don't need to go crazy. Like, this isn't old Prism where you could just like head empty, no thoughts, fart auras into play, and there was like no upper limit on how many auras you wanted into play. If you have 11 auras in play, counting like all forms of auras like Spectral Shields and shit, you can't use all of them. Like, what are you doing with that many auras? It doesn't do anything. Even if you had a full hand of blues, you can only attack with 4 of them because it costs you 3 to attack with each of them. So there's diminishing returns on having extra auras into play. So what I found is good is having enough auras in play that my opponent feels like they kind of want to fight over it. I want them in the aura matchups to be bonking my auras, but not have so few where they can realistically clear my board, and then now I'm back on 0 auras in play and it's going to be impossible for me to double aura again. But not so many that my opponent just goes, this is a lost cause, I give up clearing auras face for the rest of the game. Because now I've spent a lot of value developing auras, and if my opponent starts going face, I'm going to have to start blocking, and then if I'm blocking, having all these extra auras in play doesn't do anything because I'm not going to have enough cards to pitch to attack with all of them. Like, if I'm blocking with 2 to 3 cards every turn, if I have 3 to 4 auras in play, what are they doing? I can't attack with all of them. I'm only going to get to attack with 1 to 2 a turn. So again, diminishing returns. I've leaned into just like the blue auras because they're really efficient, Genesis because it's going to give me 2 auras into play, and the Figments to kind of give me that extra value. And then I got the extra Spectral Shields from protection. That's where we're at for a number of auras. If you told me, though, you wanted to play a few more, I think that's totally reasonable, and that's a call you can make. I think that needle swings depending on where the meta is of like how many times in a tournament you think you're going to be playing auras. Maybe you want to play a few more if it's like most of your rounds are auras. Now, I hate this card, but I decided to play a 1-of in the deck because of the low aura count. As I kind of already touched on, it's kind of hard getting a Figment into play when we're doing the aura game plan, and we're not really trying to hardcast these for 4 and then flip them and attack with them for another 4. Spending 8 resources to do this kind of sucks. One of the things that I found happens in the aura style of the deck is you get stuck on a hand that just like doesn't do anything. You're like, man, this hand of 4 Heralds is not great into Bravo right now. You end up just like maybe blocking, because like you don't even get a chance to block if they're just picking off your auras, and then you just throw a Herald at them and pass, and you don't really want to set one of these cards because like these Heralds don't do anything. They're just going to pop it. And then because you didn't present another aura, your opponent just goes, well, I know your hand sucks, so I'm just going to pick off another aura, and then it can cause you to lose your board that you spent all this time building. So the Soul Food is solving 2 problems. 1, it's helping us get those Figments into play for later on in the game, so that way I can have those kind of cosplay auras. And 2, when I have that bad hand, it gives me a way to convert that into value towards my game plan. Like, I want these things into play, so I'm still using this to establish board state. I only want to do that once per game, so I just have the 1 in there. The games go long, so the plan is when I find the Soul Food, I'm trying to probably set it, and then use it to cash in a bad hand. If you end up using it towards something else, like putting it in your Genesis or just pitching it or blocking with it because you feel like you just don't need it, that's fine. The card still blocks for 2. If your opponent's trying to grind through your board state and not just race you, it can help you kind of reestablish your board state with all these Figments. Like, that's a big game if you get like 3-4 Figments into play. Now, I just want to touch on a couple card choices at the end here. First is Miraging Metamorph. That card is a seemingly obvious inclusion into the deck. One of the things that the new Luminaris opens up is one of the strengths that old Prism had, where you could go pitch a yellow and throw 2 War Tunes and just have this crazy above rate 3-card play. If they're both red, you're throwing a 3-card 14. That's nuts. The problem that I've run into is in the aura game plan, it's fine. It's just like 7 unblockable damage in that matchup, which is good, but I'm spending my time not developing my board, and usually that's what matters in the matchup. But in the Herald game plan, I find that a lot of the times it not being a Herald is more important than the value that I could have gotten off of a War Tune. I just, every time I drew it, I kept being like, man, I wish this was a Herald, because I care more about the hit trigger for my hero ability getting a Figment into play than the number on this card. But I think it's a totally reasonable card to put into the deck. It's just like, do I want to cut a set of red Heralds? That's tough. It is nice, though, that it pulls double duty in both matchups, but like I can't afford to put more reds in the deck. Now we're just asking for the deck to brick. Do I want to go lower in red Heralds? It's a knob you can turn. It's a reasonable thing you can do. I was just feeling like it wasn't necessary, and I cared more about getting this extra value here than the potential value I could by having a good 3-card hand. D-Reacts, there's a noticeable lack of D-Reacts in the deck other than Soul Shield. I kept running into awkwardness with them, so I ended up cutting them, and again, the red thing, like, I just have so many reds in the deck, like, can I afford to add even more things like Sink Below to the deck? It not being a yellow for your weapon or a blue for your other weapon was a big deal deck building wise, and then it not being a light card for Genesis and things like that, it just like added a lot of clunkiness where like, I'm just like drawing hands that don't play now. So I ended up cutting it. Again, it's another one of those, I know I'm saying this a lot, but it's another, this is reasonable to add to the deck kind of card. I chose to opt out because I was feeling like I just didn't need that extra like fighting over breakpoints thing. I think that it definitely comes back in though if we're in a meta that like blocking the 4 breakpoint matters a lot. Like, you know, in the past with Briar, like blocking that 4, super important to stop that break point of blocking. I don't feel like we're in a meta right now where that's as important, where we don't have like a million decks just going like 4, 4, 4, 4. Now this is going to be like a 2-part point. One is Dromai and one is some of the floater slots I have in the deck. So I have these Angelic Wraths and these Celestial Cataclysms in the deck, and essentially these are just like floating yellows in the deck. They could just be a set of Ravages and Rebirths for all that it matters. Like they're just random yellows that I threw in the deck of just, these are floater slots of things that I'm messing around with. And the big thing with this was I found that I was boarding these out a lot when I was on auras, so I just wanted something that was in the deck that was good when I was heralds. So like you could turn these into whatever you really want. They're just kind of filler cards. The Cataclysm though, really this is just here as a popper for the rare mirror you run into, and Dromai. Now Dromai was always one of the big reasons to not play this deck before. I will say I think the matchup is much better than it used to. I think before it was basically go get lunch and save the 50 minutes and not waste your time. Funny story, that actually happened at the Realm Rumble thing in Ohio a few months ago. I sat down across from someone and they were like, hey, Pheano, right? You're Dromai, I'm Prism. And then he just hits the concede button on his phone and he's like, do you want to talk about Prism for like 10 minutes instead? He just like didn't want to waste his time. That's how cursed the matchup was before. I think the matchup is way less cursed now. You're not favored by any means, but it's playable. The raw aggression and hit effects that you can get with Luminaris plus your Heralds, I think pulls a lot of weight. You can just like have these crazy turns that go super wide, especially with your Eruditions and stuff. So I think there's hope there. So one thing you can do is just add some poppers to kind of even out the matchup a bit. Another thing you can do is play the other chess piece, Vestige of Soul. If you're not familiar with that card, it is a if you put a card in your soul this turn, I think it specifies light. Whenever you pitch a light card, it makes an additional resource for the rest of the turn. So what you can do is you can go pitch a yellow, throw a Herald into something, or either a dragon or your opponent's face, and if it hits, the next thing you pitch will make an additional 1. So you can pitch the yellow to throw your Herald, then pitch a blue, and now that's going to make 4 resources. So you can throw 2 Heralds, you can do something with your Figments. There's a lot of different things that you can do with that turning your blue into 4 really changes the math of how the deck works. And so long as you're doing that, you can also add Tome of Divinity, so you can now go pitch a blue, play Tome, draw 3 cards, keep going crazy, and you can just have these like super nuts above rate rounds that you wouldn't have normally had access to with the other Luminaris. So I think there's like an angle you could go there if you wanted to get some extra equity in the matchup. Similarly, you could probably even add Library to the deck to like go even further beyond. So I think there's hope in the matchup. You can choose to add cards to your deck now to move the needle in the matchup where you can win. Is that worth it? I don't know. It's one of those things like if Dromai's so popular that you feel like you should add sideboard slots to your deck for the matchup, is it even worth bringing Prism? That depends on where you can get that matchup. Like if you can get it to 40-60, maybe that's worth it. Like to me, that's probably worth it if you are just favored into everything else in the field. That being said, it's tough out there. Like Brood is really popular right now, and so is Kasai, and both of those are pretty tough matchups. The Guardian, you know, you can play your aura game plan into, and it's fine. But Brute, you can't play heralds into them really. And if you play auras, they at least with KO, it's so easy for them to go like big thing at your face and then claw at the end at your aura. It's tough. And even if you like take a bunch of damage to establish a bunch of auras, they can still scabs out of it, and they can whiff. But like, is that the life you're trying to live, where your entire matchup percentage is on their die roll on scabs? Because if you lose that, you probably lose the game instantly. And if you win that, well, the game continues. Then they just roll scabs again, and you know, you're in a better spot than you were last turn if they hit the scabs, but you're still not favored by any means. So it's real tough out there. So this is kind of a hostile meta for Prism. Essentially the meta that you really want with this deck as it stands right now, like how the deck is currently configured. You know, you can reconfigure the deck and maybe things change. But as I see it, what you're looking for is an aggro meta that decks don't really want to block and really struggle dealing with heralds. So you can go, you know, block with 2 cards, pitch, throw 7 at them, and your 7 is really worth like 11, but also with some prevention on the back to fight over their on hits next turn, making it so that you really win that turn cycle. And like Ninja decks is a good example of that, which is really weird. You wouldn't have thought Ninja would have been a good matchup because of like Kodachis and like little things like that to pick off your Figments. But again, we just don't flip them right away. We just leave the Figment in play and we wait for the opportune time to flip it. And they just like can't deal with you throwing 7 at them every turn and getting all this free value on the on hit. A meta like that, and then a meta of decks that just struggle into auras will be the other one. For example, Guardian traditionally struggles into that. I've found that Assassin struggles into that. They just like don't have good things to throw at the end of their turn to pick off auras. They have the go again, they have the weapon and stuff like that, but the thing is, their small go again attacks are the things they want to throw at the beginning of the chain, not the end of the chain. So if they would play their normal turn cycle, but the last thing was into your aura, it would be like 1 at your face, 6 at your aura. That's not the life they're trying to live. That's just not good. So then what's the alternative? 1 at your face, 1 at the aura? They're not winning the game that way. And that's just not the meta we're looking at right now. We got popper heavy decks that are very aggressive. We've got warrior decks with lots of attack reactions. That is a thing that you can struggle into, because once you get the Figment into play, it becomes really awkward for you to block around those reactions to protect your Figment properly. And then they just like will sandbag the damage sometimes, where they present you small damage and they're like, do you want to spend your 4 on this too? Let me know how I should react to get your Figment off the table. So it's tough, but the deck has legs. Like the deck is, like I said before when I was talking about it originally, I don't think this makes her broken or anything like that. I don't think she's like the best deck in the game or anything like that, but she's a functioning deck now. Where before, it felt like you were a clown bringing it, where now you don't feel like you're a clown bringing this deck to your armory or a pro quest or anything. Like you can win games. So I think that's a good spot for her to be, like, playable. I'll take playable. But that's it. If you guys have had any success with the deck, feel free to let everyone know in the comments. You can share your experience with the deck. I know there was a number of people at the Battle Hardened that actually made some deep runs. I think there was a couple people that went like X2 with Prism, and I was kind of eyeing their decks, doing some interesting things there. With that being said, I never did make that poll on what we should nickname Luminaris. I'm going to get around to that now, so go check out link below, my Twitter. I'm going to throw up a poll over there. We will, the community will decide what is the new nickname for Luminaris, because we got to figure out what the hell we're calling this thing. So go vote there. Let us know what you think Luminaris should be called. As always, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you.